Well, welcome back to Donington Park, everybody, for our second F3 Cup race of the day. The cars are already on their formation lap, so let's very quickly guide you through the way that they are going to line up. It is number 90, Alex Fours, that starts on pole position, and alongside is the championship leader, number 28, Stefano Lini. However, the maths suggest the championship cannot be won in this race. It will go down to the very final race of the season. Row number 2 of the grid is 69, which is John Crobit, and alongside is 22, Malcolm Scott, with row 3 being the former champion, number 15, George Line, and 8, which is Dominic Paul. The final row of the grid is 21, which is Tony Bishop, and number 77, which is Robbie Watts. So the maths work out that at the moment, Stefano Lini still leads the championship on 236 points gross. You drop your worst score of the 10 rounds in this championship. So if we remove the worst score, then Stefano Lini only drops 1 point. He drops to 235 on a net score. Alex Fours claimed maximum points earlier on with win, pole, and the fastest lap. He's also on pole for this one, which nets him an extra championship point again. So he's on 237 points gross, but drops his worst score, which is a 6th place, puts him on 220, 15 points behind on net scores in the championship. Even if Stefano Lini wins this race and sets the fastest lap, and Alex Fours fails to finish, that would mean there'd be 34 points separating them and 36 still available. So mathematically, it can largely be done in the final race. But Stefano Lini could take a big step towards claiming the championship in this one. Both of the main championship rivals line up on the front row of the grid. Alex Fours second in the championship on pole position. Stefano Lini leading the championship, sitting alongside. Fours claimed his 3rd win of the season earlier on this morning. Stefano Lini has had 4 wins so far this season. We know that it's going to go down to the final race of the season, but what is it going to look like? We'll find out in this 20-minute race that is coming up, the penultimate race of the 2020 F3 Cup Championship season. All of the cars on the grid and ready to go. The red lights will come on, the revs begin to rise, and 20 minutes of F3 Cup are go here at Donington Park. Slowly away is Stefano Lini, I would say. John Crobit was slow away as well. It's another great start from George Line, the former champion, who might be up to 2nd, and indeed is by the time they get towards Redgate Corner. So Stefano Lini down into 3rd position, and his main championship rival, Alex Fours, converting pole position to the early race lead as they charge their way down through Hollywood and the Craner curves for the first time. On towards the braking area for the right-hander at the old hairpin. Towards the tail end of the field is Robbie Watts, who had a difficult qualifying session yesterday in what were atrocious conditions. Gained a couple of places from his starting position on the grid earlier on today compared to his finishing position, but is still tasked with working his way up from the tail end of the field, as is number 8, Dominic Paul, who is looking to attack Malcolm Scott in the early stages. Dominic Paul, former GT Cup Championship runner-up, looking to try and squeeze his way up the inside. Stefano Lini also now looking to try and reassert himself back into 2nd place. Has got a good run on George Line, the fast-starting car of the former champion. Big lock-up from Stefano Lini heading in towards the Robert chicane for the first time, but he's got the job done. He's up into 2nd place. George Line down into 3rd, and possibly under pressure for 4th place, because John Crobit is looking to try and work himself alongside. He's alongside, but he's on the outside line for Redgate Corner. Can he sweep his way around the outside? No. Tries to cut back on the exit of the corner to get a better run heading on towards the top of Hollywood, and now side by side through the Craner curves. George Line on the outside line for the first part of the Craners, but is able to get his nose ahead by the time they get to part 2 of the Craner curves. So George Line just losing the 1 position there and still in the podium places. That's the 5th place car. That's Tony Bishop, the number 21 car, running in 5th position in the hands of the man who's been at the wheel of the championship in F3 Cup for quite some time. But it does look as though John Crobit was able to gain the place there. Not quite sure what happened to George Line. Maybe just a little bit slow heading out of the old hairpin, and John Crobit was able to have the momentum exiting the corner, and therefore he now moves up into 3rd position. George Line dropping down into 4th place. He started 5th, so either way it's still a net gain, but he was up into 2nd place in the early stages of the race and now is down into 4th. There goes Dominic Paul just heading through the Robert chicane, driver who was racing in the British GT Championship for Century Motorsport last year. He's running at the wheel of the number 21 Dallara, the F317 2017 chassis, that car. Sitting there in 6th place, he's got Robbie Watts behind him in 7th position. And Malcolm Scott is there in 8th place, but that is Alex Fors, that I think has had a problem on the top of Hollywood, and that was the driver who was leading the race and had just popped in the fastest lap of the race. I do think he's going to drop all the way down through the order potentially there. So Stefano Lini, I think, has now picked up the lead of the race and has got a bit of clear daylight between himself and John Crobit, who's there in 2nd place, George Line in 3rd position. So for Alex Fors, who didn't put a wheel wrong in the race earlier on today and claimed maximum championship points with the pole position, the race win and the fastest lap as well, he's given himself a huge amount of work to do, but we didn't quite catch what happened to him at the top of Hollywood on the exit of what would have been Redgate Corner. So this is lap number 3 about to be concluded, and Stefano Lini heads over the start-finish line comfortably in the lead of the race. John Crobit there in 2nd position. Then it's going to be George Line in 3rd position. Tony Bishop now up into 4th place. 5th will be Dominic Paul. 6th will be Robbie Watts. And 7th, I'm afraid to say, is the pole sitter Alex Fors, and that has not done his championship aspirations any good at all. He's already going to drop 17 points from 6th place. So if he finishes in 7th position, that would then become his dropped score, and his next score would put him on 237. So the best he can do is try and work his way through the order. At least the mistake happened early on in the race, which gives him a chance to recover, and he's now looking to try and recover at least one of those places. Around the outside of Robbie Watts, heading in towards McLean's Corner, gets a good run coming up towards Coppice, should sneak his way through up the inside. Yet through goes Alex Fors, and that's place gain now, back inside the top 6. The next car he's going to set his sights about is his teammate, which is Dominic Paul. Now, Dominic has not been in for the full championship season, but he will want to try and do as best he can. How easy is he going to make it for his teammate to work his way through and past? Alex Fors getting the tow. Dominic Paul moves out of the way, and I think is almost going to gift the position to Alex Fors there. Has the inside line. Alex sneaks his way up the inside, so the two Chris Dittman Racing prepared cars swap position. Chris Dittman himself, a former champion in this category as well, the man who runs these two cars. He was the champion back in 2012 as Chris Dittman, and still occasionally turns his hand to F3 Cup when he's not busy running the team and preparing cars. And now Alex Fors is now tasked with another car to try and overtake. That is long-standing F3 Cup competitor Tony Bishop. Tony will not make it quite as easy for Alex Fors to sneak his way through, but on the exit of McLean's Corner, Alex Fors looks to try and carve the door open on the run up towards Coppice Corner. He's got the door open, it's ajar, through goes Alex Fors, and now Dominic Paul is trying to take the opportunity to squeeze his way through as well. Tony Bishop just about gets the nose of his car across the front of Dominic Paul, but now we're almost 3 wide, because looking to try and join in the fun as well is Robbie Watts. So Tony Bishop hanging on to the place, Robbie Watts gaining one, and Dominic Paul losing one through all of that with a locked brake coming in towards Roberts. So some good fighting going on amongst the competitors in this slightly longer race. The first race of the weekend, 15 minutes. This one and the final championship race of the season are scheduled over 20 minutes. And we've currently got 14 minutes of the race to go as we look back towards the battle for 2nd and 3rd place. John Crobit under pressure from George Line. The newer Dallara of John Crobit, the F317. It's the F310, the 2010 chassis of George Line, the former champion, that sits behind. George was the champion back in 2016. His overall finishing position last year was 4th place. He's never quite been able to have the same kind of momentum as he had in 2016. It's been a tougher last 3 years, really, or 4 years if we include this one, for George Line since his championship title. So through the Roberts chicane, this is lap number 6 that's about to be completed. Stefano Lini is a long way up the road now in the lead of the race. He's 11.5 seconds up the road, but look to the background of the shot. Alex Fors now in 4th position, car number 90, looking to try and recover from that mistake that befell him at this point of the circuit. It was the exit of Redgate Corner where he clearly had the problem. Well, now he's back into 4th place and closing in on that car that's in the middle of the shot, which is George Line. Through the old hairpin, John Crobit, George Line, then Alex Fors, 2nd, 3rd and 4th place, all of the time while Stefano Lini is pulling away in the lead of the race. Fastest lap to the race leader last time through with a 62.056. Another place gain for Alex Fors there up the inside of George Line as they came in towards McLean's Corner. So now back into the podium places for the man who lies 2nd in the championship, down to 4th for the number 15 car in the hands of the former champion. Along Starkey Straight, this is lap number 7 that's about to be completed. Now, what can John Crobit do about trying to hang on to second place? I do think the writing's on the wall to a degree. John won't make it easy, that is absolutely for sure, but Alex Fours seems to have had the upper hand on everybody other than his main championship rival so far this weekend. Alex Fours and Stefano Lini have been largely matched for pace, with everybody else squabbling over third position and some way adrift of the pace that the lead pair have had. Alex Fours, though, has still got work to do here, trying to carve his way past John Crobit down through the crane of curves. Is he going to do it at the old hairpin? No, just opts to tuck behind and follow the second place car through the old hairpin, knowing full well that there'll be plenty of other opportunities in the remaining 12 minutes of this race. Can he do it up at McLean's Corner, which is where he got George Line last time through? No. John Crobit wise to that and just making sure he covered off any move from the former Monoposto racer, who still sits there in third place. Talking to Alex Fours at the end of the race earlier on today, and he was saying despite the fact he's driven F3 cars before, but in the Monoposto specification, he had a lot to learn coming into the championship this year. You have to drive these cars differently, and he's done so well up the inside of John Crobit, gaining the place. Thought the writing was on the wall. He only took a couple of laps. Now Alex Fours is back into second position, which means that at the moment that is 29 championship points to add to his tally. Now, if he can set the fastest lap of the race, that would add another 1. At the moment, the fastest lap is still going the way of Stefano Lini, the race leader, who last time through raised the bar a bit more. The new fastest lap is now a 61.889 second lap, 61.889 seconds. That is about 5 seconds quicker than they were doing in the race this morning, where most of the cars, even on what was a dry-ish track and continue to be a drying track through the race, they were all on wet tyres, so about 5 seconds quicker now than they were doing in the race earlier on, because of course they're all now on slick tyres on what is a beautifully dry, albeit cold day at Donington Park at the moment. So we're fast approaching the half-distance point of this race. Further down through the order, Tony Bishop is being kept very busy for 6th position. He's got Dominic Paul directly behind him at the wheel of the second of the 2 Chris Dittman racing cars. Dominic was a former runner-up in the GT Cup Championship, which is here also this weekend at Donington Park. So he raced for Century Motorsport in the GT3 category of the British GT Championship last year. Hasn't done a huge amount of single-seater racing, I don't believe, but is certainly having a busy old race there, trying to put Tony Bishop under pressure. Equally as much, George Line is having to soak up the pressure to try and hang on to the final podium spot, because John Crobit has caught back up the former champion over the course of the last few laps. There was just a 1/10.5 of a second between the pair of them as they came over the start-finish line last time through. And John Crobit at the wheel of the car that is 7 years newer, F317 for John Crobit. It's an F310 for George Line. As for Tony Bishop, he's still just about doing enough, isn't he, to fend off Dominic Paul. Dominic Paul with a much better run coming in through McLean's Corner, but Tony Bishop getting the car positioned where he needed to so as to protect the inside line as they flick their way up towards the blind entry double apex right-hander at Coppice Corner. And Tony Bishop again being slightly defensive, just instantly moving the car to protect that inside line on the run in towards the braking area for Robert Chicane, whilst Dominic Paul snatches that brake again. Did that a couple of laps ago. Needs to be careful so as to not to flat spot the Pirelli tyre. Of course, you get the flat spot on it. Every time you stamp on the brakes, it will rotate back round again to that flat spot. And when the flat spot's on the tarmac, it'll lock at the same point. So through Redgate Corner, fastest lap of the race last time through, went the way of Alex Fours. So he has, for the moment, picked up the extra championship point. The lap time he did was a 61.886. That was just 3/1000ths of a second quicker than Stefano Lini has done in the race so far. So it's the blink of an eye, really, that now nets, for the moment, Alex Fours that extra championship point, which could become vital come the final race of the season, which is coming up later on this afternoon at Donington Park on the national circuit. So 8 minutes to go. George Line still being harried along by John Crobit for 3rd position. John, I think, has fallen back a bit more on this lap. So the gap was 0.1 of a second, it went out to 0.4, it's now out to 0.5. Tony Bishop still under attack from Dominic Paul for what will be 6th and 7th places. Behind them is Malcolm Scott, who occupies 8th place, but there's some good little battles going on, and Dominic Paul looking to see whether he can unlock the door. Tony Bishop just moving the car one way and then moving the other. In theory, you can only block the competitor behind you once. Tony sort of moved to the right-hand side and then swept to the left so that he could take as wide a run in towards Redgate Corner as possible. And that, for the moment, seems to have just done enough to fend off Dominic Paul as they thread their way for the 12th time down through the Craner Curves and the Old Hairpin. Fastest lap of the race is bouncing around now. It's gone back the way of Stefano Lini, the extra championship point, the race leader with a 61.8 exactly. So that's now 86 thousandths of a second faster than Alex Fours had done for the fastest lap. But Alex Fours goes through over the start-finish line and goes an extra 3 thousandths of a second quicker than that. So a 1 minute 1.797 is now the fastest lap. So Alex Fours back with the extra championship point again, and it all could become vital come the final race of the season later on today. Tony Bishop, there's no let-up in the pressure at all, is there, as he desperately tries to hang on to 6th position. Weaving around is Dominic Paul, looking for the inside line at Redgate, then deciding that no, that's always going to be covered off. I'll try the outside line and try and get a better run coming off the corner and see if I've got more momentum onto the top of Hollywood and the Craner Curves. But Tony Bishop is wise to that. Tony's been racing in this championship for a good number of years now. Since I think it's 2014, 2015, we've seen Tony Bishop as a regular competitor in this championship. And also, he's got other race cars available to him as well. So we see him out in things like the Monoposto Championship in Monoposto configured F3 cars. So does a lot of single-seater racing, does Tony Bishop. And at the moment, he's having to draw on all of that experience to try and keep the aspirations of Dominic Paul at bay and try and hang on to that final place inside the top 6. The fight for 3rd is still not sorted either. George Line has not shaken away John Crowbit, while Stefano Lini, now our race leader, is starting to get amongst the traffic. So a lap is placed on the car of Malcolm Scott, so the number 22 car, the Dallara, now off the lead lap, and this time through by the look of things. Oh, Dominic Paul was alongside, but again it was on the outside line. Can he get the better run coming off the corner? No, Tony Bishop is still just putting the car where he needs it to. So it's still 6th place for Tony Bishop, 7th place for Dominic Paul, despite everything he's throwing at it. He's got to sort of look at the bottom of the bag and see if there's anything more that he can throw at it here. Gets a good run coming out of the Old Hairpin, but I think Tony Bishop is going to still just have enough momentum heading up towards McLean's Corner. 5 minutes to go in what is the penultimate race of the season. The fastest lap of the race has just been popped in again by our 2nd place car, Alex Fours. So a 61.687 now is the fastest lap of the race. So for Alex Fours, it is going to give him, I think that would give him 250 championship points in total. Stefano Lini would be on 270, so there'd be 20 points separating them heading into the final race of the season, with 36 points potentially available. So down towards the Old Hairpin. John Crowbit just clattering off the curves a little bit on the inside of the corner. Looks as though the gap between himself and George Line has just come out a little bit through the first third of the lap. And as they then thread their way for what will be the 15th time through McLean's Corner. George Line not quite under the pressure that he was a couple of laps ago for 3rd position. Any slip up at all and John Crowbit's still there, but he's just about got enough advantage so as to not worry too much as they head in towards the braking area for the Roberts chicane, because John Crowbit will close up in the slipstream, but he'll still be too far away as they flick their way through the right and the left-hander. Over the start-finish line, still together. John Crowbit not sitting in the slipstream this time though of the former champion as they head through Redgate Corner. You can see John Crowbit there using all of the tarmac as well at pit lane exit to try and widen the entry angle to the corner as much as possible, but there's still nothing he's been able to do. There's not been a chink in the armour as yet from George Line. Now over the start-finish line here, Dominic Paul, having just got past Tony Bishop, is now coming under attack from him. So Dominic Paul briefly inside the top 6. Is Tony Bishop back through? Yeah, those lock brakes again from Dominic Paul. Don't think all is well with his car. Oh, right, there we go. That's the problem. He's got a left rear puncture as Dominic Paul, and that has happened at the worst possible point of the track because it was right at the end of the lap. So he's going to have to limp that car all the way back round to the pit lane, and with a couple of minutes to go, that's rather going to undo his race, I'm afraid to say. Prior to that, it had been a really good battle between himself and Tony Bishop, and as we say, he just clambered inside the top 6 for the first time. Over the start-finish line comes George Line. Well, John Crowbit had taken a bit of a breather a few laps ago, but is now absolutely riding almost on the gearbox of the Dallara that lies ahead. Up towards Redgate Corner. This is lap number 17, 2.5 minutes to go. George Line still under pressure from the number 69 car that sits behind. Down through the Craner curves, they thread their way. Now, Jon Krobit has always been a shadow, a very present shadow and a danger for George Lyne, but he's never really been able to unravel third place from George. Well, he's running out of time, he's running out of options, and he now really needs to be throwing everything, including the kitchen sink at it, if he wants to try and grab a podium place here. John, who we haven't seen at all of the rounds, he did the Snetterton round prior to this, and his best finish there was 5th position in the first of the races. He dropped out of the Cup class and into the Invitation class for the second of the 2 races, but he's here looking to try and get himself on the podium for the first time in F3 Cup 2020. George Lyne, however, has other ideas about it. George finished on the podium in 3rd position in the race earlier on, and is desperate to want to try and repeat that feat. So up towards Redgate Corner, now on lap number 18 with a lap and a bit to go. So they are on their penultimate lap this time through, one would have thought. Depends on the pace that Stefano Lini is setting up front as to whether we squeeze extra laps out. At the moment, he's 12 seconds ahead of Alex Fours, and Alex Fours is now 15.5 seconds up the road from this pair here, fighting over the final podium spot. So through Schwantz Curve, the sweeping flat-out left-hander, use all of the curb at Schwantz Curve to try and get the car in a straight line, pitch it in towards McLean's Corner, then uphill, blind entry to this one. You can't see the apex for the right-hander at Coppice Corner. When you turn the car in, that's when you know whether you've made the apex. It's a double apex, but you don't worry about the second one. You're positioning the kind of middle part of the circuit and looking more at the exit of the corner at that point, and then hard onto the brakes at the Robert Chicane. Use as much of the curb as you dare, and then accelerate your way back up through the gears, over the start-finish line and down the Wheatcroft straight. George Lyne still hanging on to it. There's just under 0.3 of a second between himself and Jon Krobit, who closes up again on the brakes, but George Lyne has been around F3 Cup for a good number of seasons now, so he is a former champion. He's the only former champion that we've got on the grid this weekend, actually. And for the moment, he is making sure he draws on all of that experience so as to keep Jon Krobit behind, who is out racing for only his second weekend of racing in F3 Cup this year. Here comes Stefano Lini, though. He's not quite going to squeeze a further lap in because the clock is just going to tick to 0 as he comes over the start-finish line, but didn't see the checkered flag go out at this stage, so Stefano Lini still needs to press on because the flag did not come out. The clock literally was on 0. I think he altered his pace and slowed up coming out of the Roberts chicane, and it could have done an extra lap, but I don't think he quite made it over the start-finish line before the clock had fully ticked to 0. It must have been literally half a second or a second away, so he's got to press on again. There is another racing lap now for them all to deal with. George Lyne over the start-finish line, still under pressure from Jon Krobit. They've got the car of Dominic Paul to get through and past. Dominic has been into the pit lane, and the Chris Dittman racing team have replaced that left rear tyre that had punctured. He stays well and truly out of harm's way, doesn't want to get involved in the battle for the podium place while he's a couple of laps adrift of everybody. But I think George Lyne now has just about done enough. I think the fire has gone out of the belly of Jon Krobit, who has pressurised George Lyne all of the way, but has never been able to squeeze his way through to the podium spot. Here comes Stefano Lini. Checkered flag does go out this time. Stefano Lini weaves from side to side, but if I've got the maths right, that won't be enough for him to claim the championship, and in particular because Alex Fours is running in 2nd position on the road. That's Robbie Watts in 5th place, just diving up the inside to put a lap on Dominic Paul. But for 3rd place, it's going to be surely George Lyne. As long as he's neat and tidy through the Robert chicane, it's going to be back-to-back podium spots for the former champion. Despite the pressure from Jon Krobit, he couldn't quite manage to muster enough pace to grab 3rd position in the end. So it's George Lyne in 3rd place, Jon Krobit in 4th place. Robbie Watts will finish in 5th position, and we should see Tony Bishop come through to complete the top 6. So for Stefano Lini, it is yet another win. He didn't get the extra point for fastest lap, so that will put him on 270 points going into the final race of the weekend. For Alex Fours, I think it's 20 points adrift. Confirmation of the results then is Stefano Lini that claims the win, with Alex Fours in 2nd place and George Lyne completing the podium. Jon Krobit was in 4th place, Robbie Watts was 5th, and Tony Bishop was in 6th place. Malcolm Scott was 7th, and after the puncture and a call to the pits, Dominic Paul finished in 8th position. So that's it from F3 Cup at Donington Park. Don't forget though, we've got our final race of the weekend, our final race of the season, and a champion to crown later here at Donington Park. Until then, it's goodbye.